Please state your name and age for the record.
Harvey Stanley Hecker, and I'm 80 years old.
It's a good age. Now, where were you born and raised?
I was born right here in Toronto, and I've lived here all my life.
Can you tell me about your family background?
I have a wonderful family. I have 3 brothers, one older by 4 years, and twins 6 years younger than me. We were all born in Toronto. My father came here as an immigrant from a small village of about 3,000 people in Poland. Half of them Jewish, half of them Roman Catholic. He arrived at the age of 18 when in 2012 my mother, make that 1912.
Right.
My mother came from a city in Romania, and she arrived in Toronto about 1926. My father was older than she, very unusual in the Jewish community to be a bachelor at the age of about 30, 31, 32, and he married my mother. It was a marriage made in heaven, and they were, I don't want to say they were poor. My father was a pocket maker. He sewed pockets into pants and jackets, these kind of things. It was a poorly paid business. He worked for a very large company, and he rarely had 5 days of work. I was born in 1932, about 3 years after the market crash. And curiously enough, my father, as a bachelor for many years, had invested a little bit of money in penny stocks. And all of that evaporated in the market before my birth. My father always had 2 jobs. And we didn't see him a great deal because he was off to work early in the morning, walking to the corner to catch a streetcar that went from a home that my parents had bought when I was 4 in 1936. The house cost $3,500, and my parents borrowed and put together $500 as a down payment. He would take the streetcar every day on College Street over to Bathurst, and then go all the way down to the waterfront to a 5-story factory building. He worked as a tailor. My mother was a homemaker. So there were 4 boys in our family. We had a 3-story house, and like most people, we had tenants. The ground floor of our house, we did have a basement. That's where the furnace was. That's where the coal room was. That's where the coal men came by truck and poured the coal out of sacks right into the basement window onto the floor in the basement. The ground floor was a kitchen, a dining room where my parents slept, and a living room. The second floor was rented out. It also had the only bathroom in the house, used by everybody, of course, both my family and the tenants, because the second floor had a kitchen and a living room and a bedroom. The third floor had 2 bedrooms, and the children slept on the third floor. My older brother and I slept in a double bed together until he graduated from medicine. And we never had separate rooms. Tragically, our world fell apart when my father died unexpectedly. What was happening in these years? I went to school. I walked to school every day, which was about 4 blocks away. Winter, spring, and fall. Came home for lunch every day. Went back in the afternoon. We had cousins living on the street. We didn't socialize or go out for dinner. People didn't do that. There is no such thing as babysitters in those years. So we would go with our parents to cousins, nephews, nieces, uncles. And that was whatever little social life we had was visiting. My father always had a second job at night. And that also, again, was very common. But we lived near a park. The park had tennis courts in the summer. The park did not supply tennis nets. So either you played without a net, or you might know somebody who had a net, which wasn't very often. In the wintertime, they would take down the posts for the nets, and they would spray water over the tennis courts, turn them into ice rinks. We would come home after school, and after hours and after dinner, I would walk for about 20 minutes, half an hour, to go to Cheder, an after-hours Jewish school. From the time I was about 9, when I was old enough to walk by myself at night, and we'd spend about an hour and a half at Cheder, getting prepared for our bar mitzvah. The schooling, the education wasn't of a high order. Our teacher was an immigrant himself trying to make a living after hours. Couldn't be making much. Wasn't trained as an educator. So we learned by rote. We just memorized. We didn't understand what we were reading. And he didn't bother translating it. In the wintertime, it was pretty cold. And on occasion, we would get there. And his home, where we learned, had a great big park with a ravine. And sometimes we would take Coca-Cola signs that were made out of, I guess, some kind of metal. We'd use them as a sled. We'd jump on them and go down the hill. Didn't make him very happy when we came back all wet. During the war years, we weren't conscious of what was happening to the Jews until later on. We knew that the war was going on. We had a victory garden. That means we planted vegetables in our backyard. We would go to the movies on Saturday afternoon, and it would cost a nickel plus a pot or a pan, something made of metal that could be converted for war use, something made out of rubber. They stopped all car production from 1941 until 1945. The factories stopped making a lot of products and instead started producing things for the war effort. The factory my father worked in, for example, started to make uniforms for the soldiers, and for the first time he had full-time employment. He was working 5 days a week, and I remember one week he made $40. He also had a night job doing the same thing. And then as the war years grew on and we became aware of what was going on with the Jews, my mother, who had arrived in Canada in about 1926, still had a mother living in Romania. And she desperately tried to see if she could find out anything about her, but there was no communication because Germany had overrun Romania. After the war was over, my mother and father started to send money to the Red Cross to try and find her mother, her half-brother, and half-sister, because my mother was the product of a broken marriage when she was a child. 2 years later, we got a letter from the Red Cross, got all of our money back. They were not able to find her relatives, her mother. What was happening after the war? Suddenly there was a lot of employment. There continued to be a lot of employment, even when the soldiers came back. My brother got into medical school. They had an unwritten rule. Only 10% of the medical school students could be Jews. There were no black people in the country. There were few Italians. Most of the people had come from Britain or had come from Europe after the First World War. My father came before the First World War. And when the soldiers came back, a lot of them were given scholarships because they've served in the army. So they crowded into schools. It was difficult to get in. For example, to medical school, where they had a 10% rule. There was anti-Semitism. I can remember very distinctly as a child, maybe I was 10 or 12, there was a riot several blocks north, and the 16, 17, 18-year-old non-Jews were chasing Jewish kids down our street right past our house, throwing stones at them. After that, anti-Semitism became much less physical and less obvious, but still existed behind the scenes, just like the unofficial rules. In 1943, when I was 11 years old, I started to work after school. We had very little money, and I wanted spending money. Of course, my parents didn't have any money to give me. So I would, like a lot of other kids, try and find after our work. I would be a delivery boy. I would be a bus boy. I worked in the nurses' cafeteria in the one of the big hospitals, clearing off the tables. These kinds of jobs were available. There was no minimum wage, whatever it was. I mean, it was making 15 cents an hour, 20 cents an hour. We lived in a neighborhood where this was normal, this was natural. You went out, you got a job, and you did whatever you had to do in order to, if you wanted something, you wanted to buy a Monopoly set. So my parents couldn't afford to buy me a Monopoly set. You had to make money. My older brother did the same thing. My younger brothers did the same thing. When they became 12, 13, 14, 15, people worked after hours. That's how it worked. As the years went on, my brother was in medical school, and my father had died in 1947. So we had to work very hard. And I couldn't afford to go to college. My older brother was in medical school. My younger brothers were too young. There was one profession that you could go into that didn't require college, and that was the accounting profession. And in that profession, there was hidden anti-Semitism. Non-Jewish firms, who were by far the majority, like 90%, wouldn't hire apprentices who were Jewish. They didn't say that. The jobs just weren't available at that time. But there were a few Jews who, through a stroke of luck, had found an opportunity to graduate from the accounting profession. And there were a lot of opportunities in Canada for people who were prepared to work. Immigration from Europe was increasing. People wanted to leave. Jewish people certainly, lots of other people wanted to leave Europe after it was destroyed by World War II. Not just Jewish people, people from all walks of life. Very few had money, but they had ambition and hard work, were prepared to work hard. And they flowed into the country, and the country welcomed them with open arms. Unlike during the pre-war years, when one of the Canadian immigration officials, when asked about allowing Jews to run away from Europe, where they were being hunted down, and his answer was, none is too many. That was his response about how many Jews he would let into the country. None is too many. With immigration, People needed housing. People needed clothing. People needed food. People were prepared to work hard. I graduated from correspondence school, working during the daytime for an accounting firm. We called it being an articled student, an apprenticeship, similar to the English system, because accounting had started its existence in Scotland many years before as a profession. And I did well, and I graduated in December of 1956, became a partner immediately because I had been so successful in writing my exams with the highest marks in Canada in 1954 and the highest marks in Ontario for my final exams in 1956. And on August 8th, 1957, a mutual friend introduced me to Sheila Collins. And that day changed my life. We were engaged within 30 days and married in 4 months. Her parents had done well in the construction industry. Her father had started as a tailor. Her mother had built up a lingerie business in the house, starting with one sewing machine by herself and then adding more and more. They were a very industrious couple, and they were generous to us when we got married with a wedding gift. And in 1959, 2 years later, we had a child, and we were building a home. It was a big house. It was 1,720 square feet with three bedrooms and 2 bathrooms with a walkout basement onto a ravine. Most houses were about 1,400 square feet, 1,200 square feet. This was 1,720 square feet. We thought we were on the top of the world. I was working, everybody in my generation worked very long hours. We had 2 more children. Gordon, who followed Joel 22 months later, and Karen, who followed Gordon 4 years after that. And Sheila would tell me, don't come home from the office unless you come home for dinner or after the children are asleep. But if you come home in between, you'll get the kids all so wired up that they won't go to sleep. And she, of course, was looking after the house and the children. In the early years, we only had 1 car. When we finally graduated to being able to afford a second car, I bought a car for $200. About a year later, Sheila discovered that the children were getting wet when she was driving them in the car, and to her horror discovered that the floor of the car was rotting through, and that's how when she passed over a puddle, the water would splash up. We graduated from that car to something that was a little grander. I think it was $1,000 second car. But life, although there continued to be hidden anti-Semitism, was good. Canada was growing. Canada had raw materials. Canada was attractive. Canada allowed immigration. And we had opportunities that our parents never had. Restricted. No Jew had a job in a bank or an insurance company. Indeed, when I graduated and became a partner day one, the Canadian Institute of Chartered Accountants decided to set up a new research project. And the woman who headed up the research project invited me to be a member. This was a great honor for a Jew to join that exclusive club of being a volunteer for the profession on research. She told me she would take me to lunch at the Granite Club on Bloor Street. I told her, Gertrude, I can't go to lunch with you there because they won't let me in. She said, all we're going to do is have lunch. I'll tell you what the volunteer job's all about. I said, Gertrude, they won't let me in. She said, why not? I said, because I'm Jewish. She said, don't. Ridiculous. I said, make a reservation. Tell them your guest is Jewish. She called back half an hour later and she said, Harvey, I found a charming restaurant nearby. Hidden, subtle, but it existed. The 50s and the 60s and the 70s were years of growth and opportunity. Sheila and I even joined a country club, the Bayview Golf and Country Club. And it also had an unwritten rule, 10% Jews, 10% Italians. Of course, with prosperity and with anti-Semitism, there was a response from the Jewish community where we couldn't go and be accepted. We built structures, infrastructure for ourselves. So there was a Jewish country club. But Sheila and I joined a country club that was not a Jewish country club, but it had an unwritten rule, 10% Jews, 10% Italians. By the middle 60s, there were a lot of small and medium-sized business. There were lots of opportunities for people to work hard. Retail businesses, primarily businesses that did not require lots of capital. Very few people had lots of cash. They had ingenuity, they had creativity, they had desire, they had hard work. And they had to find the businesses where they could operate the business with modest amounts of capital, which the banks were not likely to lend. As the years went by, the banks became accustomed to lending to the smaller businessman, the smaller entrepreneur, and very quickly realized this would be a great opportunity for them because they were able to charge higher prices, higher interest rates on their loans to smaller business than to larger business. The risk was greater, but these people worked very hard. The small business people, very, very hard. They did not want to go bankrupt. When your mother was 4, 1969, we moved into this house, the house that we presently and still live in. This house had 2 stories, and we put a swimming pool in. It was unbelievable for me to imagine as a child that I would ever own a home with our own swimming pool. In my naivete, the only swimming pool I thought existed in all of Toronto was down at the lake, where we called the area Sunnyside. Curiously enough, right beside the 5-story factory my dad used to work in. It was an enormous, humongous pool. Little did I know that there were in existence in those years, and I'm talking, now I'm going back again, that individuals could have swimming pools or tennis courts. Common people, people like Sheila and me, who worked hard, we could have a swimming pool. Incredible. We had 2 cars. Yes, we were financially comfortable. We were given opportunities. I was given opportunities to use skills and talents that were granted to me and given to me and blessed with. And I used those skills and talents to be successful as an accountant, and built a small firm with 5 partners into something much larger. Once again, during that growth opportunity, I'm talking about the 60s, I knew I couldn't grow fast enough with internal growth. I wanted to be big. I wanted to join a large firm. I wanted to merge my firm with a large firm. All the large firms were non-Jewish, but they had offices all over the country. They had offices all over North America. They had offices or relationships, affiliations with other countries. That's what I wanted to do. I tried to merge my firm with one of the largest American firms in the country. Very famous. The merger fell through because I had a Jewish partner. All my partners were Jewish, but one of them wore a kippah out. That fell through. Then, a year later, I tried another non-Jewish firm with branches all over the country, all over the world. And the managing partner in Canada and I agreed on all of the terms and conditions. But when he approached the Toronto partners, there were 22 of them in Toronto alone, they turned the merger down. Too many Jews. Finally decided that I'd have to do it some other way. The Americans were 2 generations ahead of us in immigration. Their anti-Semitism was fading much more quickly. They were a melting pot, a true melting pot, and gave everybody opportunities sooner or later. And it was much sooner than in Canada. Sheila and I began to live more comfortably. Nobody we knew was very, very rich. Maybe there was one couple. But everybody we knew was making a living. Everybody we knew had a house. When I was a child, most people we knew lived in apartments. I lived in an apartment until I was 4 years old, before my parents bought that small house. Curiously enough, in about 2007, my 3 brothers and I went back to visit that house. We wanted to see that $3,500 house that we lived in for 12 years, 13 years. The whole neighborhood, of course, had changed. Immigration patterns, the demographics had changed. What had been a mixed area with a large Jewish content, there were no Jews down there any longer. All of the Jews had migrated north. They wanted newer houses. Those houses were older houses. The newer immigrants were moving into those houses. The house we lived in and the area was significantly Italian. The Italian community had a similar growth as the Jewish community, maybe a generation later. And we knocked at the door of the house that we had lived in and met the man who lived there with his wife. And after a bit of discussion, we were invited in. And the ground floor was the kitchen. The dining room was their bedroom, as it was in our case. The living room was the living room, and the upstairs was rented out. But here we had the pattern repeating itself 40 or 50 years later, except that when I saw the mirror image of our house next door for sale, I asked him what the people were asking for. House very similar to the one we had lived, that he was living in. He said $460,000. My parents had paid $3,500. I was successful in finding an American firm that would allow my firm to become affiliated with the international organization that they belonged to. By this time, I had merged 4 Toronto firms and blended them together into one firm. I had merged with 4 other firms in 4 different cities. I had, by 1989, when I retired from my practice, I was the chairman of a firm that had 5 offices in Canada, 60 partners, 600 staff, was affiliated with the 11th largest international accounting firm in the world. But that international firm was the premier firm acting in the hospitality industry. And although we did not do a lot of work, hospitality meaning hotels primarily, although we did not do a lot of work in that area, we were number 1 in the world in publishing statistical information about the hotel industry, allowing hotel developers to get mortgages by coming to our firm and getting us to do projections based on our body of knowledge as to whether or not the hotel would be successful with the number of rooms and its location. All around the world, we became the go-to firm if a developer wanted to build a hotel and borrow money. He had to get a projection from our firm, Horwath and Horwath. So by 1989, I'd done it. I'd been with the firm for 37 years. I was a partner the day I graduated. 5-man firm. 1957 to 1989. I wanted to broaden. I wanted to change. I had become involved in a not-for-profit organization, a Jewish organization called Eish HaTorah. Eish translate to fire, fire of the Torah. It was led by an incredible human being, Rabbi Noah Weinberg, who started off in small quarters in Jerusalem, had 2 branches. When our son Joel, our firstborn, became involved and became interested, and on graduating from college with an honors BA in English, decided he wanted to learn more about his own religion. We as a family have been members of the Reform Synagogue. As a result of Joel joining that organization to learn more about Judaism, Sheila and I went over after about 6 months in 1983 to see what he was doing. See, what is a yeshiva? We met the Rosh Yeshiva, that is the head, the dean. We're enchanted and attracted with his magnetic personality, with his vision, with his desire to ensure that there was continuity and pride in being Jewish, remaining Jewish. So I began to become involved in that organization, and it began taking up more and more of my time. And 6 years later, by 1989, I left the accounting firm, and I, with 2 friends, set up a consulting firm. We had no business on day one, but the other 2 had capital, and we had energy and ideas, and we rented quarters. And from 1989 until today, I'm still partners with one of them. The other regretfully passed away. And although we had over 20 years together, close to 20 years with the three of us, it was totally different from my experience in running a major accounting firm. There's no politics. Nobody got a salary. Nobody had a claim on my time. Whatever we made, we made. We split it 3 ways. We did very well. But it gave me more time to be involved with Asia Torah. Curiously, when I became involved in 1983, the headquarters were in Jerusalem, where the rabbi had the yeshiva. He had a few condominiums. He had a few young people learning. They slept in some of the condominiums. They studied in others. He had a branch in St. Louis because somebody had come up and said, I like what you're doing. I'll finance it here. He had a branch in Toronto. That was opened in 1982. There were 5 rabbis who had opened this branch because somebody had come to him and said, like what you're doing, I'd like to help. There were 2 branches. I became involved, Sheila and I became involved. And I became the president of Asia Torah Toronto. And I was the president for 9 years, and then became the international president. And when I retired from Asia as the international president in 2009, Asia Torah was the largest property owner facing the Western Wall. It owned, subject to a mortgage, on one of the buildings, 85,000 square feet facing the Western Wall. It had 42 branches around the world, a branch in every continent. It had an internet website that was getting 3 million hits a month. It had about 200 rabbis employed around the world, a number of them embedded in college campuses where the greatest threat to Judaism and to Zionism existed. So concurrently, with the opportunity to join together with 2 friends, which left me with free time, with no obligations, I was able to devote more time. And I spent 16 years as the international president. Have I retired? Well, I try to go to the office every day, although I do spend the winters in Florida. Once again, something that my father, who passed away at the age of 53, who worked as a tailor, could never have imagined that one of his sons would live as graciously, would be able to go away for the winter These were unheard of concepts. How has the world changed in 100 years? My dad died 60 years ago. 1947. Give or take a few years. The technology that exists today is mind-blowing. I'm not talking about computers. I'm talking about something as simple as a television set. When I was a child, we had a radio. It was as large, it was 3 feet high and 2 feet wide and 18 inches deep. I would pull up 2 chairs and lie in the 2 chairs. The radio was in the kitchen. And on Sunday night, they would have a movie hour. When I say movie, it was condensed, it was on the radio, it was a script, but it came from a movie. Someone told me in 1949 that they were going to have TV with a picture, and the radio would have a picture in it, and you could see the people. Unbelievable. Incredible. 1949. I'm talking about technology today with Facebook, which I don't understand, with Twitter, with Hooters, whatever it is, I have no idea. Young people today can communicate in a different language. They're on the phone, on their cells all the time. People walk around and carry tablets. What is today considered ordinary and everyday, and which is obsolete every 5 to 10 years. They come out with new products every year, and within 5 years, all the older products are obsolete. Things that didn't exist, Google, Facebook, opportunities to communicate, speed, cars with air conditioners. When I was a child, we didn't even have a car. Windows that operated in a car electronically, air-conditioned houses. I look back on 80 years of change. I'm amazed, I'm gratified, I'm grateful. If I want to tell young people today, you want to have a good life, you want to enjoy life, there's a very simple path. Count your blessings. Be grateful. Don't count what you don't have. Count what you have. That's the secret to enjoying life. You can go through life sad, or you can go through life happy. God gave us free will. Which would you like? You want to be sad? You want to be happy? You want to count what you have? You want to count what you don't have? Be happy. Be grateful.
Is there anything else you would like to add that you feel I should ask you?
At the age of 80, I can say with great gratitude that I have been blessed to be born in this country, to have been given skills and talents, to have been given my beshert, that is, my bride, to have been given 3 wonderful children, 3 wonderful people that they married. My greatest wish for them is they should have as much pleasure from their children as we have, Sheila and I, from ours. Our 9 grandchildren, God willing, should marry as well as Sheila and I, and get so much satisfaction and joy from the life ahead that we have enjoyed. I'm not going to say for our life in the past, because our life is still ongoing. I don't ski anymore. That's okay. There are things that I can't do any longer. That's okay. But what I can do is count my blessings. And that's what I do every day.